Livingston, and this is a show of my mother's needlework. My mother was Martha Freeman Sales Nicholson, who was born in 1896, and then she was married in 1917, and then she and her husband lived in Bristol all of their married life in the summertime. My mother started doing needlepoint after she was married. She liked to do artwork when she was a kid and when she was in school, but this particular type of very complicated and intricate needlework was something she started in the 20s. Every piece that she did was made specially for a dear friend of hers, perhaps of her parents, or for herself or her family. So nothing was ever sold on the open market or anything of that sort. They're all very highly specialized. I guess you're going to take a picture. There's a picture on the wall of my mother, which was actually a suggestion of my brother, that inasmuch as she died in 1947. So most of the people that would see this show do not remember her, have seen her work here and there, but do not remember her. We were pleased to be able to have it here at the Bristol Art Museum because she loved Bristol, and there's some pictures in the show that have quite a lot of Bristol background. And it's been a great pleasure to work with the people here in presenting it. I didn't say what the date was, but this is actually, today is the 21st of April, I believe, and the show opened here on Friday night, the 13th. And it is 2007.
Okay, stop for a minute.
Okay.
I think it's appropriate to start with this picture of this Wind Hill swimming pool, which was built, I believe, in 1922, and this picture was done in 1929. The pool really looks fairly similar today, and Martha Nicholson's grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren still enjoy swimming in it every day in the summertime. And it is still salt water, which is what my father insisted upon when he built the pool. Still in it, and very dear to my heart because it's the one that's being shown right now is a picture of the Remora. Very important to me because I loved sailing in that boat when I was young, and even when I wasn't so young, and our children and grandchildren and some great-grandchildren still sail the boat today, and it lives off the house all summer. One particularly interesting thing about this picture is that if you look closely, you'll see that it's Wind Hill in the background. The other thing that is slightly unusual is that it was very seldom that the wind would come from that direction, so you would have the spinnaker flying as you were going past the boat north to south.
Say that the boat was built, what kind of a boat it was.
Well, I can go back.
No, just keep going.
The boat is a Harrisoff 12.5 footer. It came into our family in 1929, shortly after it was built. There was a big class in Bristol with lots of racing and good times for many, many generations. Well, not generations, many years. Then at World War II, fell off quite heavily, of course, but then after the war, there was a little rejuvenation. There is no regular racing of Harrisoff 12.5 footers in Bristol Harbor anymore, but every time the Harrisoff Museum has a rendezvous, there are quite a few that show up, and we actually sponsor a round Prudence Island race called the Wind Hill Trophy. It was started by my father, not quite sure when, but I think probably around 1929. This is a portrait of a pointer dog, hunting dog, belonging to Mr. Percival Madeira of Philadelphia, who was a very close friend of my grandmother, Martha Nicholson's mother. I think one of the unusual and exceptional things in all these needleworks are the backgrounds that my mother made up appropriate for the feature of the piece. She told me once that she practically went up a telegraph pole trying to decide what color poison ivy was growing on stone walls in the fall, which I should be using in the background of this piece. This she made in 1933. Okay, this is a hackney pony named Mighty's Might that belonged to the William McCalls, Mabel and Bill McCall, who lived at North Farm in Bristol. They became very interested in raising hackney ponies and then built a new stable and found people that knew how exactly to train the horses, and they became quite famous going around the country winning shows. Both Mr. and Mrs. McCall did drive the hackney ponies. The background is of North Farm, where they lived. And North Farm today, as most people will know, is a housing area with clusters of very attractive houses on the hill that you see in the picture. And this was done in 1937. And so people belong to. This is Lucky. And Lucky was a Cocker Spaniel dog that belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Osby, Alice and Ray, who were very close friends of my mother and father. And their son was also a good friend of my brother's and mine. He sailed a great deal with me when I was a teenager. Lucky is sitting in their favorite chair, I believe, in their living room with the appropriate colors. This was done in 1937, I think. 39, you said.
39.
39.
Do you want to talk about the technique a little?
Yeah, I will. When I get to this little chair was in my mother's sitting room, or I call it a boudoir chair. I don't remember her sitting in it very much, but she picked out the colors particularly to be appropriate with the decoration in the room. There is no date on it, so I'm not sure when it was done, but it also must have been done probably in the 30s.
Still on.
What?
Still on.
You want me to go?
Yeah.
Okay. This fire screen of two Samoyed dogs was done in 1931 for my mother's, Martha Nicholson's father-in-law, Samuel M. Nicholson. My father actually raised Samoyed dogs, and these two dogs came from his kennel and were very, very beloved by my grandfather. I particularly like the faces and expression on the dogs and how well you can see the beautiful fur that a Samoyed dog has. The names of the dogs are actually towns in Siberia because, or Siberian names, because this kind of dog was the Siberian sled dog. The background in this is the garden at 71 George Street where my grandparents, Samuel and May Nicholson, lived, which now belongs to Brown University.
I don't think you gave the names.
Didn't I count?
Okay.
You should start with every time.
Go ahead.
This is a portrait of Schnitzel and Spindle, dachshunds that belonged to my mother's sister-in-law, Martha Lavallée. And I think it was done in 1937. They lived on Fifth Avenue, and if you look closely, you see that the picture out the window, the scene out the window is Central Park across from their apartment. My mother usually used a photograph or a snapshot for the actual picture that she was going to place onto the canvas. She did not normally draw anything on the canvas unless it was a perspective line of some sort. And then, as I mentioned earlier, she made the backgrounds up to be appropriate for the person and for the scene. Okay, this portrait of zebras was done in 1930 and actually was taken from the cover of a Saturday Evening Post magazine, which probably some of you may remember. My mother had a fascination for zebras. She had a collection of little miniature ones made out of everything from wood to ivory to everything in between that she collected. And so she, when she saw this picture, she very much wanted to do it in needlepoint. And then she picked an appropriate African scene for the background. This portrait of a Papillon dog, whose name was Free Coquette, belonged to a very good friend of my grandmother's named Pauline Danielson. And as is, I think, indicated by the moire silk in the background and the British flag, this dog was a British champion. It was done in 1933.
You can move on to the next one.
Little one.
Yep.
This little portrait of a West Highland Terrier, whose name was Beansy, was done especially for my grandmother because Beansy was her favorite little dog, and we used to go to her house in Pawtucket, and Beansy would be always on deck. And this one does not have any date on it, but probably the late 20s or beginning 30s. This beautiful portrait of an old farmhouse in Exeter was done in 1937 and the house belonged to Helen and Murray Danforth, who were Providence people and also lived in Bristol in the summertime for quite a few years, and they were very close friends of my mother. This house was not their permanent house, but they went off on weekends and vacations and gradually added quite a few different parts onto the house. This is more like the original, and unfortunately it was then torn down, so there's no other record of that beautiful little house and garden. This is a portrait of somebody, Annie, what is it? Oh, how stupid. Start again on this one. Irish Annie, who belonged to Molly Wall. I don't think her husband Asheville really cared much about horses, but he was a great fisherman and spent a lot of time fishing with my father. But this was a very favorite horse of Molly Wall. She rode when she moved to Providence after she got married and had her horse, I believe, at Jacob's Hill. This was done in
No date.
No date, that's right, I said that. I probably shouldn't have any favorites, but this picture of the rhododendron walk and the porte cochere of my grandmother's house in Pawtucket, in a place they called Salholm, is probably my favorite because I think it's such an exceptional use of color to show the distance between the hydrangeas and the oak trees at the very end of the walk, with all the rhododendrons in between. It was a beautiful, stately, old Victorian house, which is no longer standing.
Oh.
This is the only portrait that my mother ever attempted. It's of her youngest son, William Sales Nicholson, always called Sales, when he was 3 years old. I believe it was done in 1930. She said that it was extremely difficult to be able to do the flesh tones and the features in it with an expression. But it's a very sweet picture, I think, of a little boy. It doesn't matter which one you go to next. This cigarette box is encompassing a Samoyed dog that belonged to the family, my mother and father, and we children, named Peter. And actually his name was Peter the Great because he was a famous Russian Tsar, of course, and with the Siberian background. We always had a dog of some sort around, but Peter was a handsome, lovely, lovable dog. Cigarette box also frames a picture of a Great Dane named Sultan who belonged to my mother's sister, Nancy, and her husband, Garnet Day, who lived in Greenwich. But they had raised a series of Great Danes in their family, and my mother made this particular picture especially for them. I found this little picture amongst my treasures after I had tried to collect all of the other items in the show. But it's a very sweet little picture, and I thought maybe people would enjoy it. And I have no idea when it's done, but it's also of Peter, I think, so it must have been around the very same time as his work was done. Looks like holly in the background.
Go ahead, Judy.
Okay. I believe that there was one showing of my mother's needlework. I don't know how thorough it was or how many of her pieces were in it many, many years ago at the Providence Art Club. I do remember seeing it, but I don't have very good memories of it. My mother was an artist member of the Providence Art Club, but that was a long time ago. I was particularly excited to be able to find so many pieces of her work so that they could be displayed together, because I think it makes a very interesting arrangement. There are 17 pieces altogether.
Is that white background bad?
No, no. So I'm just trying to get in close so people can see that it's, you know, when you take it from a distance with a video camera, it looks just like a photograph or a painting. If you're getting close, of course, you can see that it's fabric. Very fine work.
The audio is on, is it?
Yeah, it's always on.
Some people have asked me how many stitches to the inch my mother's work has, and I honestly don't know, but it must be something close to 24. The finest I've ever done is 18 stitches to the inch, and this is very, very much smaller than that.
$18 minutes.
That covers very